Hello and welcome. Big news and developments in the technology e-commerce space. Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, has announced that he is transiting in the third quarter to executive chair of the Amazon board, and Andy Jassy will become the new CEO of this company. Now, Jeff Bezos is only 57 years old, Andy Jassy is 53 years old. No one expected Jeff Bezos to do this now, though the transition was generally expected, at least in the circles that follow him closely. Now, there are two questions which arise, both of which are interesting. One is, does this mean anything, if at all, for the e-commerce space or the web services space, which, by the way, Andy Jassy set up and grew to the scale and size that it's become, both globally as well as within Amazon. The second is, what does a transition like this mean when you are running a company as a startup founder or as an entrepreneur? I mean, what is the best time or the right time to hand over? Remember that Amazon has had an amazing run, particularly in the last 1 year. It has a market capitalization of over $1.6 trillion. 70% of that growth has come in the last 12 months, along, of course, with other technology companies. The last quarter was over $100 billion at about $125 billion. So it's a record run in many ways. So you could argue that maybe the best time to step aside is when you think you're on the top. So let's try and understand this also equally and importantly with an Indian lens. To do that, I'm joined by Haresh Chawla, partner of True North, also an active speaker and commentator in the venture capital and innovation circuit. I'm also joined by Sharad Sharma, co-founder of iSpirit, the foundation that looks at product companies, and also an active speaker, commentator, and player in the innovation circuit in India. Thank you both for joining me. So Haresh, why don't you go first? So how do you view this sudden announcement from Jeff Bezos?
No, I think it's come at a time when Amazon has clearly cemented itself in the landscape after the post-COVID surge in e-commerce. I think Amazon's position has moved ahead by almost 5 years or 10 years of growth has come back in. So I think what's really happening is that there are multiple facets that we need to look at. One is Jeff Bezos' own personal agenda to drive innovation, not only at Amazon, but other ventures. The second thing is the scrutiny that's coming in from regulators. And Jeff Bezos has been the face of Amazon all these years. So there is scrutiny coming and there's a big cry for breakup of tech. So clearly there is a need for getting a new face there. Probably see what happens. Will the regulators allow such high dominance in e-commerce and in cloud services all to be in one company? So that's the other aspect here. And the third is, I think your company is fully ready. He's built a fantastic operating system for Amazon. And we've seen how some of these founders have managed to build that operating system within the company. We saw that whole transition that unfortunately happened in Apple with the demise of Steve Jobs. But frankly, they had built an executive team that really took the company forward on the same ethos, the same culture. So my sense is that, this is the time he probably wants to bring that that culture into some other ventures that he's already working on and spend more time on them, because Amazon has really now become a machine, an incredible machine, which is gobbling up business across the world. Good or bad is a separate part of the discussion, but the operating system of the business is fantastic and I think that every company tries or should emulate actually.
Okay, so we'll come to the part about whether it's good or bad in a moment. Sharad, your thoughts?
No, I agree with Haresh. I think companies grow in innings. We've seen that happen even in India. Make My Trip was one type of company, international travel, then it became, domestic travel, now package tours. Netflix was like that. Amazon's also grown in innings. And I think this marks, coming of another innings. And as Harish said, most likely it means a breakup of Amazon. And at least, 50-50 is currently the profit pool between the cloud and the retail portion. And regulatory pressures are high. This kind of is going to give them the space to make that change. It's very hard to make that change if the founder CEO is on top. So to me, this is a very strong signal that this is a breakup. I've had an opportunity to meet both of these guys, including a very long dinner with, 3-4 of us with Jeff. And so, highly intense guy and very clear-headed, and a big learner. So I think he's going to remain very busy. in other ventures, and but Amazon will probably devolve into 2 or more players as we look ahead.
Okay, and we'll come back to that dinner in a moment, Shahid. So, Harish, if you look at now e-commerce or retail specifically, what has changed or was changing in the last, let's say, a couple of years, which perhaps will be impacted, or has it impact on the transition that we are talking about?
So, at a very core, e-commerce was always a bit handicapped in the retail space. And Amazon understood that since you couldn't touch or see or feel the product you were buying, the companies that were selling online had to actually work harder, make it much more frictionless, give you same day or next day delivery. So there was a lot of additional cost that e-commerce companies, put in to make sure that they could keep growing and give you a good alternative to stepping out of your home and buying in retail. Amazon also has been a capital story because they have managed to raise money at the lowest cost. They managed to keep their working capital cycle so tight that they're able to fund this little handicap and have managed to be really the only company that has set the ground rules as how to overcome these handicaps. Post-COVID, that handicap has actually gone away. You actually now worry whether you should go to a retail location. So across the board, I think companies, and not just Amazon, across the board, all companies have come to this new realization that the consumer expectation has been set by Amazon. But the cost for doing business online, which is cost of doing business, cost of getting a customer, cost of making sure that they are able to leave behind that handicap and really transact with you has gone down. So I think that the whole market, which is why you're seeing Shopify again take off in a massive manner. So my sense is, for e-commerce as a whole, this is a completely new world post-COVID. For Amazon, my sense is competitive intensity actually goes up because the rent Amazon charges to sell on its platform is massive. It takes away 30 to 40% of a product company's margin. It's not cheaper than selling on let's say modern trade or commercial retail. But now several companies will start using Shopify kind of platforms and try and reach customers to directly. And that unbundling where logistics will become one part, will get separated out. And the whole shopping experience now is much more easy to do because consumers want to transact online. It's going to be a fundamental shift across the world in that sense.
So you're saying in a way that he's moving away when the most, if not the most, but the more difficult part really comes in or is about to start?
No, my sense is I think there is a tailwind on Amazon, but there's a tailwind across the sector as well. Earlier, the tailwind was only with Amazon because of their unique execution model. But now it's going to be a tailwind for everybody, and Amazon will end up being the biggest beneficiary because they have such deep and strong customer relationships.
Right.
So I don't think the time is becoming difficult. Time is becoming better for Amazon actually.
Right. So let's talk about cloud services for a moment. So and the selection of Andy Jassy. Now, of course, he's an old-time lieutenant, was widely seen as someone taking this position, but he's also the person who conceptualized, launched, and grew cloud services to what it has become today, which is also not just helping Amazon, but also helping companies like Microsoft grow. So, any thoughts on what that means and the selection of an Andy Jassy beyond what we know?
See, I think in the selection process, I think the core thing that a founder looks at is that who will carry the DNA forward. So I would read much more into the Andy as a person and their relationship and how he can carry the flag forward of a company that works in the manner that Amazon does. The extreme aggression, extreme focus, the willingness to embrace failure, the willingness to make mistakes. I think when you put all of this together, I think the candidate choosing happens there. Because what's great about a company that, if you're trying to build an institution that has to outlast you, it's the DNA and the culture that has to outlast you. And therefore, you end up grooming a person over the few years, and you look for the traits that can allow that DNA to continue getting replicated again and again. Which is why Tim Cook was not a very obvious choice for Steve Jobs as well, right? Right. So therefore, that relationship between those two people, I don't think we can comment on, but the driving force of that relationship is the fact that can the DNA continue to be carried on in the same strength and manner as it was done earlier.
Okay. Sharath, your thoughts on cloud and the potential for cloud, and could that have been at all a driving decision, or as Harish says, in a very Tim Cook, Steve Jobs style, it's really the DNA and the person you really trust to hand over the entire enterprise to?
No, clearly, I think he's right. DNA plays a very important role. And especially, I think Jeff had actually become what he called as a culture inspector inside the company, right? He told us in that dinner that we had that, the business is too big for him to get involved anywhere. So he picks 2-3 areas where he goes all the way down to the shop floor or to the janitor and does every role. And he can only do that for 1 or 2 things there. And why does he do it? He doesn't do it to understand the business alone. He does it to understand how the culture is translating at every step of the way. So he had become the custodian of the culture, and this is even several years back. And he had set up an engine which was actually taking the business forward. And so absolutely, I think it is, the DNA is going to be an important factor. Also keep in mind, the cloud business and the retail business are very different. Retail business is actually finished products that was being sold. In cloud, you are actually not selling finished products, right? And it's a fundamentally different way of thinking about that business. And if you go deeper, Andy brought that thinking to life. Now, we don't hear of that so much here in India, although now that we have people wanting to get into the data center business, some of those learnings will apply. But actually, they had conceptualized inside a business a very different model for thinking about commerce when it comes to non-finished goods, right? And versus finished goods. So you will see that jostling take place as you go forward. In India, we only wrestled with the finished good parts. So, so some of that will become more visible to us because of Andy coming in that role as we go forward.
Right. Okay. And he's going to be, Harish, he's going to be executive chairman. So which means he's still going to have control, but I'm sure he will also hand over a lot of roles, tasks and roles
think
to.
The stamp of Jeff Bezos will go away from Amazon. I think that that's going to continue, and I think that in fact, if you think about it, he'll want that strengthened even more. The long-term thinking, equally combined with the day one thinking. If you see that unique combination of being continuously innovative, but continuously ensure that your processes are replicable at scale without error. So that combination is what most business leaders miss out on, because we end up either focusing a team very hard on the process, and in that drive, outcomes and innovation take a backseat. But Amazon has this unique combination to execute at scale without error by hard processes, and to be able to go and innovate and make mistakes and learn new categories, learn new segments, and build businesses there.
Right. So he does talk about in that letter that he wrote, he says, I believe we are at our most inventive now, and I hope you are proud of our inventiveness as I am, and I think you should be. Sharath, how do you read these lines? And, is there any application for us in our own enterprises and so on?
Yeah. So I think we are in an era of what you would call as missionary entrepreneurs and philosopher CEOs. And Andy and Jeff actually represents that. He was a missionary entrepreneur. It was not about, and although in the later years, Amazon did become, penny pinching, but in the early years, that wasn't the case. It was about growing the market was more significant. And frankly, he's a very philosopher, first principle CEO. He is not willing to take what's in fashion. He'll unpack it, get to the first principles, and then build forward from there. And, we have such entrepreneurs in our system, and they're not recognized because they're not VC funded. But I think Sridhar Vembu is clearly one of those people. And I think, we've corrupted our entrepreneur system by the need for private equity type returns, early, quick returns. And we've therefore created a type of a archetype that is probably not going to succeed in India. So we are at the same moment where cricket was. The 5-day game becomes a 1 day and a 20 over, and you need a new player. So you need an athletic Gavaskar, whether you like it or not. We are at the same place where hockey was. When you go to AstroTurf, you need still dribbling, but you also need speed and stamina. So you need a new hockey player. And we fought the fact that we need a new hockey player for 20 years. It's only when we started embracing it that India started rising back in hockey. This has happened to us in wrestling. We went from mud pit to the mat. We went from hero to zero. And then it took us some time to adapt. So our entrepreneur system is actually very, very broken. because we don't have sufficiently missionary entrepreneurs. We don't have philosopher type CEOs. And last of all, many of our investors are actually corrupting the ecosystem rather than advancing the cause of a healthy entrepreneurial ecosystem. And I think, all that is not working out because everybody is only focused on 30 million Indian families. That market is saturated. So the game is changing. And I think you'll see new types of players come in. And many of them will lean on the archetype that we are seeing of a missionary entrepreneur and a philosopher CEO.
Harish, your sense on missionary entrepreneurs and philosopher CEOs?
I agree with Sharad there. I think Indian management has to mature. We've had, I call it, we have multiple styles sitting there. We have grown as a country over the last 2 decades or 3 decades, actually, suddenly. We've not had the time to absorb and pass on the lessons of culture or have leaders understand what it means to build an institution that outclass themselves. So I don't think there are many institutions. We've seen how companies have suffered through these management transitions. And that's a direct result of the fact that culture has always taken a back seat. Plus, our management style in India hasn't evolved. Some people are feudal, some people use matrix, some people use deep bureaucracy and hierarchies. So I think this is something that will take us time to arrive at. And as Sharad says, the role models are missing. Where do you hear people talking about how they've built their organization, how the people are proud of them? The only real example is Tata's, actually, whose institution has withstood the test of time. But we don't have many examples, and especially not in the new tech space or the emerging companies at all. Very few, as Sridhar is one example. There will be few more, but it's not the core of the discussion between founders today. Everybody's out to, let's raise money quickly and let's scale quickly. But companies break at a point once they scale. And if they don't have very strong glue that allows them, which is what culture is, that allows them to change the way they work based on the market changing. So a fast changing market meets a rigid or an unformed culture, and you have a problem in the company.
Right. So, Sharad, to put the question back to you now, this is not an easy prescription. You can't say go become a missionary entrepreneur or a philosopher CEO and come back and then start a company. I'm assuming to some extent this is ingrained in you, and either it's too late or maybe it can never be done. So, how do you then? What is the lesson or the takeaway as we view the great Amazon transition of a great individual in a great company? What is the lesson or takeaway for folks right here?
No, I think it is happening. I am cautiously optimistic like Harish is. I think this is a learning that is taking place in the ecosystem, and it is happening. I think clearly, one understanding that has developed is that a copy-paste model doesn't work, right? Our copy of Amazon itself, while it was a great exit for the investors, it wasn't really a big success story. You don't hear of it as a place to go to for lots of good lessons learned, right? Mm-hmm. So there is a realization that copy paste doesn't work. Let's get into some of these segments very quickly. When they're just evolving and build from there. The second big lesson I think which is coming is that we traditionally went back and changed our game only when it stopped working. But you look at what Silicon Valley does. They actually, when things are going well, they reinvent themselves. Netflix has, the DVD business was doing extraordinarily well when they reinvented themselves and said, we're going to offer something to the cloud. In fact, the board, as things have come out, the board tried to stop them and say, no, why are you doing this? Your business is doing well. You got to focus on that business. Now, had they not reinvented themselves, that DVD business would have gone away. Now, when the cloud business was doing well, they reinvented themselves, and today they have more Emmys than almost anybody else in the market, right? And they became a content player. So the goal of a company is to reinvent itself when the going is good, and Amazon is a very good example of that. Now, this was a very bizarre idea because in India, why mess with things if they're going well, right? Why reinvent yourself? But that idea is beginning to come. And I think I'm cautiously optimistic. We have this new class of athletic Gavaskar entrepreneurs that are emerging. And some of them are young. They understand the platform piece well. They understand how to fight a David versus Goliath battle well very early in their game. And in some respects, PhonePe is an example of that. Sameer and Rahul had to face Google Pay very early in the game, within the first year, actually. So we have entrepreneurs that are emerging. I think where things have to catch on are the enablers. And the slowest to change in this evolution today are the mainstream VCs. And they are somehow stuck in the past, and they are holding the ecosystem back. And I am hoping that some of that change will also happen in the years to come.
Okay, Harish, do you want to respond to that, because this is the second time that Sharath mentioned this? I mean,
Harish is
too much capital does cause indigestion.
No, it's not too much capital.
He's on the good side. I'm talking about others, not him. Let me be clear.
So my sense is that as mature capital also comes in, which has got much longer term horizon, right? I think that's the whole thing. Is a founder willing to do the same thing 20 years from now? Is the investor willing to back and get an exit 7, 8, 10 years from now? So that whole short-term thinking, once it's taken away, then you sit back and you say, how do I build a company that will go through change without breaking? And then people start focusing on culture, the kind of team they build, the DNA they build. So my sense, I ask a founder this question that, okay, we'll fund you today, but are you willing to do it 10 years later, even if the business is not doing well? Are you willing to continue at it? Because great companies take time to build.
And how many of them give you an honest answer?
Fundraising success and business success may come early, but that's a good company. That's not a great company.
Right. Okay. And I'm going to ask you a bit of a trick question as we conclude. But Harish, before that, what is the lesson that you do not take away from Amazon or Jeff Bezos from his journey so far?
Okay. Now, frankly, you can't blame a company for saying, I want to maximize profits. I want to maximize shareholder value. But there has to be a conscience that a business needs to build as to what actions it will take and it will not take. That conscience, and remember, the market is trying to impose conscience, which is regulation, but regulation is far behind on technology. It cannot. I think over the next decade, we'll find that regulation will not catch up. At that point, companies need to grow a conscience. And all of them have failed, frankly. Even Apple has failed. If you see what happened with the battery scam, it's not, and today, of course, they are touting privacy because they have a captive base of customers and they really don't need to bother. It's a closed ecosystem. So they can talk about privacy, actually. But the whole issue is that as you grow and mature as a company, do you grow a conscience or not? Because the market is going to be always late in imposing a conscience on you. And the market will then impose a breakup on you. Or regulation will do something crazy that will actually cement your position. So some of these guys welcome regulation. Because regulation, narrows the entry point for new players. So we are in a tough battle where, the control they wield over society, over our thoughts is so high that we need these companies to grow a conscience, frankly.
Right. Okay. That's a good point. Sharath, on that, any lesson that you would not take away from Amazon or Jeff Bezos?
No, Amazon, I think, made a strategic mistake for which they're going to pay a big price. And that is when they started competing with their own sellers, right? And when you do that, conscience or regulation, a different kind of a rule applies. So this is why you have a situation where Make My Trip, Clear Trip, Yatra, when you ask for a flight, they'll show you all the flight options that are there. And why that happens? Because back in time, 1958, Sabre, which was doing that for travel agents, was owned by American Airlines, and American Airlines was the world's largest airline. So Senate and the US government put in a rule saying that you can't give preferences to your own airline, right? And now that logic, which prevails in some sectors, it prevails even in India, although India doesn't have a rule related to that, because the GDSs enforce that rule because Europe and US follows this, and they don't want to have a different market in India. And Make My Trip would be very happy to say, hey, I will only show you flights from my friends, and to be a friend, you'll have to pay me a fee, right? And they can't do that. And so therefore, nobody pays them a fee at all, right? When you book a flight on any of these places. So that's a different regulatory structure. Why that regulatory structure exists is because you don't want to compete with your own partners that is there. And Amazon did see this coming and they broke that rule, and eventually they'll pay a very big price, and most likely the breakup and subsequent regulation will come from that. Now, unless Andy Jassy, who understands this because he operated in a different structure altogether, where this rule was applicable, right? He comes in and changes things on the retail side. Now, there is a small window for him to do that, which will take off regulatory pressure. If he does not do that, then you will have the same problem that many of the other Silicon Valley companies have. They used open networks when they needed them, called net neutrality, but they didn't deliver open networks when their customers needed them. And this kind of an arbitrage, a regulatory arbitrage, is no longer, people are not willing to tolerate, whether it comes to media, it comes to news, or it comes to Amazon. And I think companies that adapt to this will deal with this better, right, and those who don't, won't. And I'm hoping that Andy Jassy will make some of those changes, and Amazon will adapt, and therefore, will preempt some of the regulation that is on their way.
Right. Okay. Last question. And from the last line of this letter, which Jeff says, "Let curiosity be your compass. It remains day one." This is, of course, now a legendary statement. It's always day one in Amazon. What does day one mean to you, both of you? Harish, do you want to go first?
I think a very quick way to actually say that don't be bound by the past. Don't be bound by the mental models that get created because of success, and look at everything afresh and embrace the change that's happening in the world.
Okay.
See, my daughter was born in 97, and Google roughly came around that time. And I think the shift is in our world, pre-97 people, the focus was on learning. For the post-97 world, the focus is on unlearning. Right? So because unless you unlearn stuff, you can't, learn new stuff. And day one is about having a beginner's mind, right? And therefore, always be unlearning and learning, right? And that's a very powerful concept. So keep a beginner's mind, because the world around is changing. Be willing to unlearn and learn as you go forward. So that's what that communicates to me. That line, it's a very powerful line.
Okay. Right, yeah. And that's a good note to end on. We've run out of time. Thank you, Sharad and Harish, for sharing your thoughts on this transition in Amazon, which should and will have a lot of lessons for everyone, including the young startups or the many startups back home in India. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.